Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today. I feel a bit like I should break into a song and dance here with this microphone, and it's quite big. I asked for the microphone because the podium is, as some of you might see, is quite high, and I'm not. So I feel a little boxed in, so I feel a little bit freer if I'm out here. So I'll see if I can manage the microphone, the remote control, and some of my notes. We'll see how well I do. I'm very excited to be here today. When Jennifer called and asked if I could do this, I was very, very happy to come. Are you signaling to me? Oh, okay. You want me to move? Sorry. I was very excited to come. I have come to a NEADS conference in the past, and I helped with the CV reviews. So this is actually my first time where I'm able to do a workshop. And when Jennifer asked me, it was on job search strategies, I thought, okay, job search strategies. What should I place the emphasis on? Interviews, networking, cold calling, there's so many different areas. And I couldn't resist. I had to cover them all. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a little bit challenging. 45 minutes to cover all these topics in hopefully an entertaining fashion. So at McGill, we would call this one-stop shopping. Students tend to like this because they don't have to come to individual workshops and spend too much time in each. They get it all in one. So it's quick, hopefully informative. So today I titled this workshop Action Plan, Taking Control of Your Future. I think it's very important that we all take action and take control. Being proactive is really important. So I'm going to go through the different steps that one needs to take to have control. Now, I'm guessing that most of you have heard this information probably several times. This isn't necessarily going to be new to you, but what I'm hoping is that perhaps you'll get a different perspective. Maybe there'll be a couple of tips that you hadn't heard of before, or maybe a different way of seeing things. I think it's important to hear this information over and over again. Sometimes by the 5th, 6th, 7th time, things start to sink in, and we figure out what works for us. So here are my steps to taking action here. I have them divided into 6 areas. And these are the areas that I'm going to cover today. So we're looking at self-assessment, and I always feel it's very important to talk about that. Often when we talk about job search strategies, we don't focus on that so much. And I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I'm really going to talk about it a bit and the importance that it has when doing an effective job search. So we need to know who we are and where we can use our skills, our interests, our experience, and education. Okay, so we're going to be looking at self-assessment and exploring options. Engaging in new experiences, very important to talk about. This is something that we should all be doing, whether we're looking for work or we are currently employed. It's important to be engaged in other activities in order to continue developing new skills, to continue knowing who we are, what we're good at, what we like and what we don't like. Preparing our application tools or our job search tools. So this is looking at CVs, cover letters, and interviews. And I'm going to go over those quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time. You are going to have that opportunity to review your CVs later. Networking, developing interpersonal and communication skills, very important. And I'm going to talk about information interviews and cold calling. Targeting organizations, industries, and occupation. Who and what exists out there and who shares my values? So how do we do this? How do we target? Once we've explored and we've figured out what we want, how do we target these organizations? So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, I put in identifying barriers. I think it's very important to talk about what our barriers are, or what our potential barriers could be. And how can they be overcome? All barriers can be overcome, so we need to have a plan. And it's important to identify them ahead of time. So we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to move right along. Okay, so self-assessment. The areas I'm looking at when talking about self-assessment are these 4 areas here. My skills, my values, my interests, and then here I'm talking about being an expert. And I'm talking specifically here about being an expert about my disability. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these. So in terms of skills, I'm talking here about hard skills and soft skills. Some of you may be familiar with these terms, and some of you may not. So I'm going to go over this very quickly. When we're talking about hard skills, these are skills that are concrete. The skills that are tangible, we can see them on your CV, it's clear. For example, computer skills. Okay, technical skills. You either have them or you don't. You've indicated on your resume that you know how to use Microsoft Office, you can use the internet, and that's clear, that's concrete. Soft skills are the skills that are not so concrete, perhaps not so tangible. And we may not know you have them depending on how well you've written up your resume. So for example, communication skills, leadership skills, ability to work with others, ability to work under pressure, multitasking. These skills are the key skills. The hard skills are important as well, but the soft skills are the ones we often refer to as transferable, meaning you've developed them in one area. So for those of you that are still students and maybe you don't have that much work experience necessarily, you've developed skills as a student that can be transferred to another environment. So it's being able to identify them and knowing how to market them for an employer. And I'll tell you, when working with students, one of the things that I see time and time again is that, not just students, because I've worked with people that have been in the workforce for a while as well, we have a very hard time identifying what our skills are. And I do this exercise with students where I ask them to take a few minutes and off the top of their head, write down what they think their skills are. And I do this in one of the workshops that I give. And invariably, most of the students in the room write down less than 5. And I always ask them this question: is it because you ran out of time, or do you feel pretty confident that that's your list of skills? And 9 out of 10 will always say, no, that's my list of skills. I have 4. It's fantastic. So what I'm seeing is that really we don't have a good sense of our skills. I think what happens is we take for granted some of the skills we have because we assume, well, everybody else has them. That's not really worth talking about. We really need to unpack them. You really need to learn how to mine for your skills. And what I suggest people to do in order to figure out how to do this is looking at your CV through the eyes of skills. So when you go back and you look at your resume, and this afternoon when you're getting your resume looked at, when you look at your activities and the jobs you may have had or volunteer experiences, look at it through the eyes of skills and ask yourself this question: what skills were required? What skills did I need in order to perform this task, or to have this job, or to accomplish this? And then on the side, write down on your CV next to that activity what the skills are. Oh, I needed communication skills here. I needed leadership skills. So this is one way of pulling out those skills. We have a lot of skills. We just need to look for them and mine them. So very important. You need to know what your achievements are. I put this here under skills because when you look at the things that you're proud of, what you've achieved. This could be a project you worked on. This could be getting into the university you wanted to in the program that you wanted to. And ask yourself, how did I accomplish that? How did I get that award? How did I do well on that project? What skills did I need to do that? So again, it's another way of looking at your skills. And again, looking at the things that we're proud of, the achievements that we have. They don't have to be huge achievements. You don't have to have won some huge prize, but things that you feel very proud of. And ask yourself, what does that say about me as a person? You know, what does it say about my character? What does it say about my skills? So again, this is about getting to know yourself. So that's the skill section. Values. Very important to know what our values are. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you need to identify what are my work values and what are my life values. Where do the two come together and where are they different? So I have, for an example here, helping others. It might be very important for me to help others. It's a value. It's something that I always want to do. But I might decide it's not something I necessarily need to do for money. You need to decide that. Or some of you might decide that you want this to be a part of your career. So again, probably a basic thing, maybe you've thought about this, maybe not, but it's important to look at your values. And again, values is going to help you to decide also what type of organization or company to work for. Do your values match up? So you need to know what they are. Similarly with interests. What are my interests? Again, interests tell us a lot about who we are, right? So you need to also look at the difference between work versus life. You can have a lot of interests. Here I put down music, it could be anything. Again, you need to decide. Do I want this to be a part of my work life, or can this be something on the side? Maybe you feel strong enough about it that you want the two. You want that in your work life as well. You want it to be a part of your everyday. So, and then lastly, talking about being an expert. Very important, and I'm sure you've heard this before as well, To understand your disability well. I work a lot with students with disabilities at McGill University, and often what I find is when we're working on that person talking to me about their disability and explaining it, as you probably would in certain situations with employers, that sometimes the explanation isn't clear because oftentimes they themselves are not clear on it. So it's important that you are the expert, that you're confident when talking about it, that you're knowledgeable about things like accommodations, that you know what resources are available to you as well to the employer. So it's very, very important to be confident in that. Okay, so I'm going to move along to exploring options and targeting organizations. So once you've done your self-assessment, you know who you are, you know your interests, you know your values, you really have a good sense. You know what direction to go in. Now you need to figure out, well, what are my options? What exists out there? Okay, so in terms of exploring, we need to do research. And again, I don't know how many of you in the room have a clear idea of what you want to do. Maybe some of you have a general idea of what you want to do, and maybe some of you are just not sure. You just know that you want a job, but you're not clear what that should be or what that's going to look like. So you need to research and see what's out there. You need to use services such as your career resource centers, those of you that perhaps are still in school and have access to that, or services outside of schools. Very important. Meet with a career advisor. Talk to people. Again, often what I see when I'm working at McGill is that with the students, we have a limited knowledge, limited view of what types of careers exist out there. And really, we only know as many as we've been exposed to. And exposed to through perhaps our families, people around us, that we know the types of occupations they have and jobs and so on. Or what we see through the media. I'll tell you right now, there's a big rage at McGill for the last few years on people coming and asking about forensics. Huge. CSI, 7 days a week on TV. So it's opened people's eyes to an area that we wouldn't otherwise know about unless you had someone in your family in forensics. All that to say is that we have limited exposure to different careers. So we need to find a way to figure out what else exists out there. Careers are being created every day. People are creating their own jobs and their own careers. So it's to really open our minds and figure out what else is out there. Don't limit yourself to the 12 you have rolling around in your head that you're not so crazy about and you're thinking, wow, what am I going to do? So we really need to move beyond that. Talk to people, friends, family, your community. I always say our greatest resource, we have a lot of great resources. You have the career resource centers, you have a lot of books, you have internet is incredible, tons of resources there, but really our greatest resource are human beings. They talk, they've had experiences, they're live, they're there. You can learn from people. So talk to people, find out what people are doing. Ask them about their careers. Ask them if they know anybody in a career that you're interested in. So really, people are our greatest resource. Don't feel intimidated to talk to people. We're going to talk about that a little later on when we cover the networking part and the informational interviews. Volunteering and part-time jobs and internships are often an interesting way to also figure out what's out there and to sort of dip in a bit and get a sense of, do I like this? Is it what I thought it was? So again, another interesting thing to do. Attending career fairs, company presentations, panel discussions, very important. And you guys are all here today, so this is great in terms of getting information and meeting people, and the internet. So once you've done your exploring, and you say, okay, I know who I am, I have a sense of what's out there, what's available to me. Now I need to target some organizations in that area or in that industry. So targeting, we're going to talk a bit about cold calling later, but cold calling, when you do this, when you say, okay, you know what, I'm really interested in working for an environment organization, and I found a list of them in Montreal, and I'm going to call them to just get some information. You need to do research ahead of time, right? You need to, before making contact, you need to know what they're about, what exactly do they do. You need to figure out who would be the best person for you to talk to. You need to be prepared in that you should have your introduction worked out so that when you're calling, you're not hemming and hawing. You know what you want to say, you have a purpose, it's worked out, and you always want to have your questions prepared ahead of time for that person, written out in front of you. Very important. So that's it for exploring and targeting. I keep feeling like I want to ask if there are any questions, but I know we're keeping that for the end. It's so hard to just keep talking and not having any feedback. Okay. Well, if anyone has a pressing question or comment, you can let it out. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over CVs and cover letters. And I'm sure all of you have one. I'm sure you've been working on it. You've probably got advice on it in the past. You'll be getting more advice on it today. So I just have a few tips, my key tips for you. Maybe you've heard these before, but just to reiterate them. For your CV, always use action verbs. And when I'm talking about action verbs, I'm talking about when you're describing your job or your volunteer experience or your extracurricular activity or whatever it might be, and you have your bullets, you're describing, because we're not writing what we've done in paragraphs, we're actually using bullet format. You're going to start each bullet with an action verb. And depending on how well you've chosen that action verb, I'm going to know what your skills are. People often want to put on their CV what they've learned in that job or the skills they developed in that experience or activity. And I always say, do not tell me what you've learned. Do not tell me the skills that you developed. Demonstrate to me that you have them. If you demonstrate to me clearly what you've done, I will know what your skills are. So if your bullets start off with managed, organized an event, created a flyer for whatever event was happening, I will know what your skills are. So you don't need to tell me. So use action verbs and use them wisely. Use a thesaurus if you want to come up with different ones. We tend to use the same ones over and over again. I'll tell you this, at the McGill website, of course anyone can go to the McGill website. We have a lot of interesting information on there, and we have lists of action verbs, we have CV samples, we have all that stuff. So definitely another resource that's open to anyone. So you can go in there and look at that. Your headings. When working on your headings in your CV, be creative. You don't have to stick to the generic work experience, volunteer experience, extracurricular activity. Be creative. If you can group some of your experiences into a particular type of heading, for example, maybe a lot of the volunteer work you've done has really been around community a lot. Why not have a heading stating community involvement? Why leave it so general and generic as volunteer? If a lot of the activities you've done and or volunteer, you've always taken on a leadership role, why not have a leadership experience section? Again, for an employer, this is much more interesting because just by looking at the headings, before reading anything else, I can have a sense of like, wow, interesting, leadership experience, community involvement. This is really interesting. So be creative with those headings. In terms of your work experience, you can have a section just titled Work Experience, and that could be the paid work that you've done that's perhaps not related to the job that you're going to be applying to. But if the paid work you have is related to the job you're going to apply to, call it career-related experience. Don't just call it work experience. Okay? So if you do have a career-related experience section, and when we use career-related experience, and we don't use the word work, you can put all things paid and unpaid in that section as long as it is career-related. Okay? And you can indicate on the side in parentheses that this was volunteer, or this was, if you want to make sure the employer knows that that's what it is. But if you regroup it for them, it's easy for them then to see the experience that you have related to the position you're applying to. When you use the word work experience, however, you need to put paid work, because that's what it's implied. So you say work, we're assuming you've been paid for that. So again, strong action verbs, creative headings, very important. Give the most space to the most relevant information. When you're unpacking, and by that I mean when you're using your bullet formats to talk about what you've done, you want to unpack the experiences that are most relevant. You really want to unpack those more. The work experiences or volunteer experiences that are less relevant to the job you're applying to, you can have one or two bullets. You don't necessarily want to use too much space there. Really give the most space to the most relevant information. Here I put you want to include everything. Now I put this here, and depending who you are, if you're a university student, college student, and you don't have a lot of work experience just yet, I always encourage my students to keep everything on right now, because even if it's not relevant, like people say, oh, but through, university, I just worked at a bar and it's not really relevant. But you know what? It says something about you. It says something that you're able to do two things. You're able to go to school and work, and have volunteer experiences and so on. So again, you don't want to leave anything off, because at that point the employer is just trying to get a sense of you. Here's someone who's been pretty busy, has done a number of things. And we could see the sequence of events with your dates and say, oh, while they were in school, they always seem to had other things going on at the same time. That looks really good. So even if it's not relevant, you want to leave it on. Those of you that have, more work experience, you've been out there, you've had some career-related work and so on, you can start eliminating some of those experiences that you had several years ago in school and that sort of thing. But for those of you that are still in school or just about to graduate, I would think a little bit before getting rid of stuff. And I would say, even those activities on the side, for those of you that perhaps, have an interest in music, you've done music for a long time and that sort of thing, these are things that students tend to want to get rid of too, because they feel it's not relevant. But you can, we're talking about transferable skills earlier. It's amazing what sometimes employers will transfer when they look at certain things. I work with students that often apply to, are going into medicine, and we do med mock interviews with them. So we help them get ready for their med school interviews. And one of the things that we've noticed a lot of times is that med schools like to see candidates that have music in their background. And so I say to students, well, why do you think that is? Why would that be interesting to them to see that, you did music for 10 years when you were a kid? And what that indicates to someone is, because we do this, right? We make assumptions sometimes, and we make transferences, and we say, well, you know what? Someone who's been in music that long clearly has passion. They have discipline. We like that. Who wouldn't want a doctor that has discipline and passion? So you have to think, like, these little things that you have on your resume will give a particular employer, not all of them, but some of them might say, ooh, I like that they did that. That indicates to me this, that, and the other. So, be careful before eliminating things off your resume. Now I have to start talking a little quicker. Always tailor. You always want to tailor your CV. I'm sure you know this. Cover letter, very quickly. Always give examples. What I mean by this is, if you're talking in your cover letter and you're saying, I have excellent communication skills, I'm a great leader, and I'm quite creative, you want to back that up. Don't just write that down without giving me examples as to why. Anybody can write that down or can say that. You need to be able to back it up with examples. Be specific. I always say to people, when writing your cover letter, write it out the first time. Just write it out. Don't worry about length. Just get all your ideas out. However they come, just get them out. Go back, then start working on getting it down to that 3/4 of a page, and ask yourself with each sentence, what am I saying with this sentence? Does it just sound good? Or is there actually something important in there? With each one, ask yourself that. I've read some letters that sound absolutely amazing, but really aren't saying anything at all. So you really want to be careful of that. Be specific. Always tailor to the company, organization, and/or position. This is your opportunity to tailor. Why do I want to work for you? Why do I want that position? And don't be afraid to be excited and passionate about it. That's what they want to see. They want to see that you're excited about that company and that position. They don't want to read a letter that sounds like you sent the same letter off to 50 other people and you just changed the name. You don't want to do that. So you definitely want to tailor. And again, talk about your achievements. If it's appropriate, if it fits in, if it's relevant to the job, talk about your achievements. Make it strong. Okay? And people always say to me, they say, Cindy, I feel so cheesy talking about my skills and my cover letter. Ugh, I've got communication skills, leadership. Everybody says that. Just seems so cliche. You know what? The truth is, there isn't an unlimited amount of skills out there. And the truth is, we share a lot of them. And the truth is, people applying to the same job you're applying to probably share similar skills to you. Okay? The difference is how you came to develop those skills. The difference is your combination of skills. So when you talk about examples and you talk about why you have those skills, that might be more interesting to someone than, say, the person next to you and how they came to develop those skills. So again, it's about your package and how you talk about it that makes you unique. The skills may stay the same, but it's how you present them. Okay. moving right along. Interview skills, very quickly. Back up everything you say with examples. Same thing, okay? Be to the point. Do research on the organization beforehand. Keep your skills, know your skills and interests, very important. Again, going back to that self-assessment, if you don't know yourself well and you don't know what you're good at and what your skills are and you can't be confident about it, you're not going to convince anyone else. You need to know what they are, and you need to be able to talk about them confidently, and you need to be able to give examples and stories about those skills. Again, I have excellent communication skills. Well, that's nice. Tell me why. You know, you need to be able to talk about yourself. That dreaded first question, so tell me about yourself. That stresses everybody out, right? You have to know and understand yourself and be able to talk about yourself confidently. Keep in mind that you're also interviewing them. We forget that sometimes. Especially when you're coming out of school. It's like, just give me a job. You know, I don't care, just give me a job. But you need to care. It's your opportunity to evaluate them. What are they like? What's the environment like? How are they responding to me? Maybe they seem like jerks. I don't know if I want to work here. You need to be evaluating them as well. You need to be evaluating the space. You know, trying to get a sense of the culture. Because if you're not happy there, you're not going to want to stick around for very long. Always have questions prepared for the interviewer. Most often at the end they'll say, do you have any questions for us? It would be nice if you had questions for them because that means you've been really thinking about it. Try not to ask questions that are easily found out on their website. Think of some interesting things that you'd like to know. You can ask about company culture. You know, what's it like here? So really think about those questions. If they've really answered your question throughout the interview, because that could happen, you could have your questions, and as you're going through the interview, they've actually, answered them for you. You can tell them that. Well, in fact, my questions got answered through the interview, but tell them what the questions were, because anybody can say that too. Oh, no, it's okay. My questions are answered. Well, in fact, these were my 2 questions, and when we were talking about this, you actually answered them for me. So it indicates to them that you did think about it, and, they just got answered, and that's fine. Don't forget to smile. Seems like a simple thing, but sometimes when we're nervous, some of us forget to smile. We get this kind of like crazy, uptight, weird facial thing that happens. And you have to remember the person sitting across from you is a human being. And what they want to do is they want to connect with you. Yes, they want to know if you're right for the job and if you have the skills that they're looking for, but they also want to see, like, do I like you? Can I connect with you on a human level? So you want to do those things that you can connect with another person. Be yourself. Sometimes we try so hard to be whatever we think professional is, and it takes us out of who we really are, and then that makes it difficult. When we're not being ourselves, other people sense it. They can't quite put their finger on what it is, but we're not connecting with you, and it's because you're not being yourself, and so that can leave someone feeling a little unsettled. I'll tell you something. I do a lot of interviews at McGill when we're hiring new staff, and, being a human being, obviously, and I'm sitting across from someone, if I feel connected to someone and I think, wow, they just seem so genuine and so nice, I would rather choose somebody like that who perhaps maybe doesn't have the same amount of skills as the next person, who maybe even more qualified, but I have no connection with and I can't see how I'm going to work with them. So really, who you are goes a long way. So you really want to be genuine. Take into account, like I said, the person interviewing you is just a person. And depending where you're interviewing big companies, you're going to get the HR person. They know what they're doing. It's their job to interview. They have the questions mapped out and everything. But other companies, it may not be. At our office, if the director's not around, well, it could be me and another advisor. And I'll tell you, the first time I was asked to do an interview, I was so nervous that I was so focused on myself I could barely hear what the person was saying. I was so worried that I wasn't going to seem intelligent enough to do this interview. I was so concerned about my next question. So you never know who's sitting in front of you. You might have the expert interviewer, but you may not. Okay, so you need to remember that and connect. Be prepared and practice. I can't tell you how important this is. I can't tell you how many people I talk to, and not just students, even among my friends and people that have been in the workforce, who go to interviews and they think they can wing it. Well, I'm talking about myself. How could I not wing it? I mean, I know what I've done. I know what I can do. Don't wing it. It's bound to bomb. If you get nervous and you miss one question and then it's downhill from there. So really you need to practice. You need to be prepared. You need to feel confident. You don't want the nerves to get the best of you. We're all going to be nervous, okay? And if you're not prepared, the nerves are going to win. Okay, networking. We all know what networking is, okay? It's people helping people. We don't often think of it this way. For some people, networking is almost like a dirty word. Oh, it's that thing we have to do where we're going to use people. And it's funny because depending on who I'm working with at McGill, if I'm working with the management students, they're all about networking. Schmoozing, they've got it down. Absolutely. It's a part of who they are. They know how to do it. They learn about it. If I talk to the philosophy student, oh my gosh, it goes against their core. It goes against their philosophy. They have this total, they're repelled by the idea of networking. And I say, okay, well, let's relax a bit. Networking really, I just found out, is a term that was coined about 40 years ago. Before the word networking, really what it was just being nice, friendly, and perhaps helpful to somebody. Okay? But now it's turned into this whole big thing that somehow you have to act a certain way, you have to be a certain way, and it can be very stressful. And really it just is helping people. It's establishing and cultivating mutually beneficial relationships. That really is what it is. And I say to my students, the truth is we pretty much network all the time. When you go out to a friend's house or you go to a party or maybe you go out to dinner with a bunch of people, you're not just going to talk with the one person that you went with, right? You're going to meet other friends, you're going to talk to them. I mean, we network in our social lives a lot. But we don't realize it's the same thing. We just need to learn how to do it in a little bit more professional manner. It really is just talking to people. It can help you to find resources, to learn valuable information about a chosen field. It can lead to interesting opportunities. It is really something that is truly beneficial. And just remember, one day you might be in a position to help someone else out. Okay? So even if you feel like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm using this person and I'm going to be asking them, you know what, if people don't want to help, they won't help. And if they do want to help and they agree to meet with you, it's because they want to. It's important to do networking because we have this, the hidden job market, which I'm sure you've heard of before, right? Between 75 and 95% of job openings are never publicly advertised. That's huge. Huge, huge, huge. And we talk about this all the time, and I say this to students, and they look at me like I'm nuts, like, I don't know, I don't believe you. I can go on Job Boom, and I can go. But it's true. Most employers don't advertise. Why? Because it's expensive, because they maybe don't want to be bombarded with like 500 resumes, and maybe it's easier to go through connections or different ways where they can target certain people and maybe have a smaller pool of candidates. So if the truth is that 75 to 95% of jobs are not advertised, well, how do you get them? Or how do you find out where they are? The only way you can do that is by talking to people. Therefore, networking, okay? So here in a recent U.S. Department of Labor survey, I'd like to find one for Canada, but you know what? We're pretty similar. 24% of jobs were found through direct contact. That's cold calling people that you don't know. Calling up a company, making a contact, and jobs happen through there. 48% come from referrals from friends and family through networking. 48%. That's huge. And then we have 5% that responded to classified ads. So I'm telling you, networking is the way to go. It's the most intimidating thing for a lot of people. But the more you do it, the more practice you get, the better you feel about it. And the more that you see that people are willing to meet with you. I think our biggest fear is that we're going to be rejected, or we're disturbing someone, or they're going to think, But and that's not really the case. And so the more you do it, and the more you see that you're getting a positive response from people, the better you feel about it. Here I put, where does networking take place? I love this picture. I took a picture of a bus. Because I'll tell you this funny story. I had this student who did our job finding club with us. We have a 2-week job finding club where we go through the whole process, sort of like this one-stop shopping, but over 2 weeks intensive, and we give them homework and so on. After one of the workshops, he went home that evening and he went out to dinner with his girlfriend. And as they were having dinner at a restaurant, he was talking to her about, I worked out my introduction and what I'm going to say. I know exactly what I want, and I'm looking for this type of company. He's going on and talking to her and so on. And all of a sudden, this man got up, and as he was leaving the restaurant, came by the table and said to the student, you know, I'm really sorry, I was kind of eavesdropping on your conversation and couldn't help but hear the area that you were interested in. I actually work in this area. I'd like to give you my business card. Why don't you give me a call, and perhaps I can talk to you a little bit about the industry and the business. Well, the guy was so blown away, he couldn't believe it. Here's the stranger who just happened to overhear and was just really happy to help out. Now, could be an extreme example, but, you know, as I always say to students now, the moral of the story is when you go out for dinner, talk really loud about your career options or career plans. You never know who might be sitting next to you, right? So it can happen anywhere. It can happen in a restaurant. It can happen in a bus. Talk to people. Talk to people. It could be a chance encounter. Use small talk. Use professional associations. If you're volunteering somewhere, talk to people around you. Ask them who they know. If you know the area that you're interested in, you know, let's say you want to go in investment banking. Just say, hey, do you know anybody who works in investment banking and your family, friends? Talk to people. Make connections. That's how you do it. So what do we have? No, friends, so we covered all that. So definitely the way to go. Now, what I want to talk about, this is continuing on the networking, informational interviews. Now, I don't know how many of you here are familiar with that. If I could just maybe get like a show of hands. Do you know what this is? So a couple of you do. Okay. I put the golden ticket here. I don't know if you guys know the Willy Wonka chocolate factory movie from years ago, and he got the golden ticket. And I couldn't resist, so I put an image of the golden ticket up here. Informational interviews, that is your golden ticket, okay? This is where you contact someone who is in an industry, a company, or in a position that you would like to have. And you ask them for 15 or 20 minutes of their time so that you can come in and get some insider information. Find out about their job. How did you get to where you are today? What's your educational background? What did you do between when you graduated and this job? What was your career path like? What do you like about your job? What don't you like about your job? Describe to me 9 to 5. Now, you're not doing this to get a job. You're not going in with the idea of, like, I'm going to get a job from this person, but you're going in to get insider information. People are very impressed with this. Taking this initiative really, really works. I'll tell you something, and you may know this or may not know this. People love talking about themselves. They really do. They feel flattered. You call someone up and say, you know what, I read about you. I saw on your website that you're, in this department doing this. I'm really interested about your job, and I'd just love to know how you got there. And also, you're going to ask them for tips and advice. What could you suggest someone like me to do to get my foot in the door? You start creating a network. Bring your CV always, because you can ask them for tips and advice on that too, and maybe they'll ask to keep it. But information interviews they work amazing. I try to commit my students now when they come to all my workshops, they know I end off on this, information interviews. I drive them crazy. But I'm going to just tell you, I do have a bit of time, a quick story about that. I had a friend of mine who did German studies, went all the way to the PhD, and taught for a little bit, and thought, oof, this is not for me. I don't know what I was thinking, disillusioned by academia. I just need to get out of this, and thought, okay, if I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to reorient, and I'm going to do something I always wanted to do. I always wanted to do something creative. She was drawn to 2 areas, industrial design and landscape architecture. Complete departure from German studies. And she was like, but I can't decide. I like them both, but if I'm going to go back to school now that I've spent an entire lifetime in school, I really need to make the right choice. So I said to her, well, what about information interviews? And she was like, well, what's that? So I explained to her. I said, well, you know what? You're going to call up these people, pick some landscape architects in Montreal and some industrial designers, and go meet with them. Talk to them. Ask them, what is this occupation like? What do you like about it? What do you do? What does your day look like? And she thought, well, that's a great idea. As a good doctoral student would, she got down to business, and I'm going to do research, and she says, I'm going to pick the top people in Montreal. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to work my way down the list. So she did research. She contacted the top 2 landscape architects in Montreal and the top 2 industrial designers in Montreal. And these are people that are in magazines. They have their own firms, really top people. And she thought, well, they're never going to meet with me. All 4 of them agreed to meet with her. All 4 of them. She asked for 15 minutes of their time. All 4 of them gave her over an hour. Okay? All 4 of them gave her a tour of the firm. 2 of the 4 said to her, you know what? When you decide what program you're going to do, if it's in our field, give us a call after your first year. We might have a summer job for you. They didn't know what she was going to pick, much less if she was going to be any good at it. But they were so impressed with her initiative that she was actually taking the time to get information. Now, okay, she wasn't looking for a job. She was looking for insider information to make a decision. But it worked amazing. And I'll tell you something, she chose landscape architecture. And after that first year, she came back to Montreal, contacted the company, got her summer job there. 3 years later, graduated, and has a full-time position in that company today. True story. So, talk to people. It really does work for insider information and then what it could potentially lead to. And when you meet with these people, you ask them, could you refer someone else to me that you think would be good for me to talk to? Someone else who could give me perhaps a different perspective? That's how you can start networking. It's intimidating. You're calling up someone you don't know. But I'll repeat it again. People love talking about themselves. Like these people that spoke with her, they were tickled. And these are top people in their field, but they were tickled that she wanted to talk to them about their career. So definitely, if you leave with nothing else today, leave with this and try to do this sort of thing. Okay. I'm pretty much on time. Barriers. I always bring up barriers with my students. They always look at me like, oh my God, this is a bit depressing. But you know what? Knowing what our potential barriers can be is empowering. Not thinking about what our potential barriers could be can be devastating, right? There are a number of potential barriers out there for everyone. We need to know what they could be. We need to identify them, and then we need to figure out what our plan of action is going to be. Okay? So, for example, university students graduating, a potential barrier that most students will face, lack of work experience. It's that catch-22. Well, you don't have enough experience. Well, how am I going to get experience if you don't give me a job? Kind of go around in that crazy circle, right? So you need to say, okay, well, this is a potential barrier for me. What can I do? Maybe I need to do some volunteer work or some activity that will allow me to develop some key skills that these particular employers are looking for so I can really market myself. Okay? So you need to decide, are these barriers, are they self-imposed or are they imposed by others? We have some that are self-imposed. I might decide that, you know what, I love living in a city, and I do love living in a city. I couldn't imagine ever living outside of a city, but depending on the type of job I may want, that could limit me. That could be a barrier, right? So maybe that's self-imposed, and I say, well, it doesn't matter because I'm not leaving this city, I'm not leaving Montreal, this is where I need to be. Well, I need to deal with it then. Okay, so this could be a potential barrier. What do I need to look at? So you need to determine whether it's self-imposed, imposed by others. You need to determine whether it is in your control to change. For example, I want to stay in Montreal. I can't speak French. That's a problem. Okay? For the most part, that's a problem. Can I change it? I probably could. I could take classes. But you need to decide, well, I can change it, but do I want to change it? Some students say to me, you know what, I speak 3 languages already. The idea of learning French, not for me right now. Fair enough. So you've decided I'm not going to change it. Okay, well then you need to come up with a plan B. What's the plan B? You need to always have a plan B. In fact, you should always have a plan C. If you do want to change it, then you need to map out the steps you need to take to change it. Okay? Don't just say, well, okay, I'm going to change it. Map out, what am I going to do? Have a plan. It's all about having a plan, being prepared, not being taken off guard. Disability could be a barrier, not the disability. Ignorance, false assumptions, misunderstandings of other people about disabilities is a barrier. How can I overcome that? I'm going to be an expert. I'm going to talk confidently about what I can do. I'm going to explain to them perhaps what accommodations I need to do the best job that I can. I'm not going to be apologetic or scared about it. Okay? You need to see what could lie ahead. You need to be prepared. You need to face it full on and have a plan of action. And you know what? If people can't get over certain things and the barrier doesn't seem to go away, you don't want to work for those people anyway, right? You need to decide that too. You don't want to work for someone who's going to put all these barriers up and say, well, I don't know, I don't think you can do this, I don't think you can do that, it's too much trouble, You don't want to work for them anyway. But for other people, it's just a question of being able to have a plan and approaching it in a certain way. All barriers can be overcome. They really can, but you need to plan for it. So this is why I talk about barriers. I think it's very important. It's empowering. It's being prepared. I've seen people who've been sideswiped by a barrier that they didn't see coming, and it was devastating, and it's almost paralyzing. You feel like you can't move. It's demoralizing. Okay? So prepare for them. They may never even happen, but at least you know there's a possibility, but I'm ready. Lastly, what are employers looking for? They really are looking for you. They are. But you need to know who you are, right? They're looking for you. They're looking for solid education training. They're looking for strong transferable skills. So you need to identify them. They want someone who knows themselves and what they want. If you don't know yourself and you don't know what you want, how can they know? You need to know that. You need confidence. And lastly, they need the complete package. You know, they want everything. You want to be well-rounded with extracurriculars, whatever you can do to get some skills and have a complete package. Not necessarily just your paper that you've graduated, but other things to complement that as well. So that's it, and I'm going to leave you with that. That's my final slide. Thank you.